Welcome everybody. My name is Stéphane van Gulick, and today we're gonna talk about learning classes with class. So before we start, I'd just like to do a small poll. I'd like to know who knows nothing about classes here. Please raise your hand. Okay, just a very few, maybe 4 or 5 hands out of a packed room of people. It's actually a good thing. Who has written classes in PowerShell before? Raise your hand. Okay, maybe 60% of the room. And who has written classes in another language? OOP. Oh my God, so many people. Okay, this is fantastic. Basically, in this session, we are going to tackle the following things. So in the end, we are going to be able to understand the concept behind classes. So a step further of just writing just a class. We are going to be able to understand why classes are, for system engineers and admin engineers, the next learning process, or at least in my opinion. And I hope I will be able to transmit you guys this message. We're going to learn how to use classes efficiently and not just write a class just to have a type, but how we can build structures and design actually solutions. And we're going to learn what I would call advanced OOP concepts. And we also going to go through some cool PowerShell open source projects, and we're going to have a look at the code and see how they structured their projects using PowerShell classes. So I'm very short in time also because I wanted to talk about so many things in 2 different talks, and I've been asked to combine them in one. So I would ask if you have questions to keep them for the very end. So like I said, originally, I wanted to do 2 talks, and I've been asked to combine them in one. So I wanted to cover really the basics, or this was like for the people that said that have never done classes, what is a property and all of that good stuff. That's something I won't cover today. And today we will talk about advanced concept. So basically, what are the lessons that I learned in the field and some best practices that I would recommend. They might not be the best practices that you would recommend, and if so, I would be open to discussions, and maybe we can find some even better best practices. We're going to talk about things like UML diagrams, the solid principles, TDD, design patterns, and then what I would call my personal next steps. So the prerequisites, you need to know what a class is, you need to know, at least to be able to follow, you need to know how to write a class and what inheritance is. If you know that in the PowerShell world, you're going to be comfortable in this talk. If you don't, you might want to go see another session because it can be a little bit challenging then. So this was just in case for if nobody knew what a class was, but so I have been thinking about how to construct this this talk. It was really difficult for me actually to get into classes because, like I say, I'm not a developer. So a lot of developers say to me, "No, but you're a developer, you write code." But that is true. But my background, I never learned development. So basically, now with experience, I realized I was missing some ground knowledge, which actually help regular developers to do cool stuff. And I have more or less learned actually all those OOP concepts by just try and error and kind of like on the streets, right? And so for the people in the back, this is me. And I was thinking, how can I transmit my message to everybody? I've been failing so often, and I've kept continuing trying to go further with the classes and everything, and I just simply wanted that you guys don't do the same errors as I did. And I've done them all, believe me, really, everything, and I still do them. And I was like, okay, how can I transmit that message about my failures? I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about myself, how I've actually learned all of that through time. So basically, this talk is, we're going to see me, this little guy over here, walking through time, through the different learning processes, and we're going to see all the failures I have made, because I'm pretty sure that some people here, or maybe all of you guys, will face this issue specifically for people that don't have this developer background like I had. And I've talked with a lot of people in the PowerShell conference and the conferences before, and I know a lot of people are or were like me, and I hope that at the end of this talk, at least you guys are going to have an idea of the keywords that you guys need to look up the tools and the books that you guys need to read to bring you like this step further that is maybe not super clear if you don't have this this developer background. So yeah, that's exactly what I said. I want you guys to discover more of the classes of the end of this project. So I would like for the people that are not super comfortable with this, that at the end of this talk, that you guys are so comfortable that you guys want to go dive deeper into the classes, that you guys implement classes in your project, or at least look at implementations in other projects, just for the sake of look into it. I would love that you guys see the possibilities that you actually have when you start to use classes in your modules, in your script. And that in the end, you're going to have new routes of learning to explore, right? So new books to read, new videos to watch, etc. And also that you guys have at least an understanding of the tools that you can use once you master this knowledge of classes of OOP, so object-oriented programming, which is maybe not very straightforward for somebody that has been written only PowerShell functions up until now. So this is kind of like what the schedule we're going to follow. So the first orange ones are part of the part 1. I won't cover them. And we're going to start immediately with making mistakes, because I'm pretty good at it, actually. So at the time, I actually learned OOP to use classes when PowerShell 5.1 came out. And I was like, oh man, this is great. I have new knowledge. And I started to understand object-oriented programming basics. I've written a few blog posts about it, which were very successful, actually. And I actually realized that writing classes is everything about trust. And that is like so important in development. But if you have written functions up until now, maybe you didn't realize that. And I've been using it everywhere. And when PowerShell 5.1 came out, I really started to try to put this motto is, if you have to write code, you write a class. And I forced myself like that to push myself to the edge of my comfort zone and to always try to write classes. So I started using it in production. I've built, for example, one small class which would load config manager drivers from a specific folder structure. At the time I was super happy. The other day I saw that class and I was like, oh yeah, that's cute. And yeah, and I use it also for another module which actually I open sourced, which is called class.hostFileManagement. And that was actually my first mistake. And I thought, okay, yay, I know everything. You know, I can just now sit down and chill. I have all the knowledge. But no, actually, it was completely false. There's so much to learn more than just simple, like having a class. And we're going to talk about that now. So this was my first open source project. I'm not sure that anybody knows it here. Maybe Irvin, I think he participated, was nice enough to do a pull request. Thank you, by the way. And so I had this first module called class.hostManagement. And it was actually really my first project. And in the end, you can see on the right part, we have my folder structure and this PSM1 file, which actually contains all my classes and an enum or two. So here, it's not very important to look at the technical implementation. So this is why I'm not zooming on the code. And so I just want you to see here the structure, one PSM1 file, several classes in it, an enum in it. And I was like, yay, I'm going to put it on the internet, and this is going to be fantastic. Everybody's going to love it. But then I received feedback. I also gave it to some colleagues at work, and when I got the feedback, it was horrible. It was really horrible. I actually realized that using just classes in a module compared to before, it was like a big change. So before everybody was comfortable with import module, now with classes you needed to use using module and then the thing. By doing that had actually a big impact on the usability of your module. And so people that were comfortable with import module, that were comfortable with functions, they now needed to learn this new methodology of working. And so maybe for engineers that's okay. maybe for developers that's okay, but for operators that use your code just to get things done, that was too much. And I received a lot of questions saying, how can I discover the functionality? Because yeah, in classes you don't have command-based help. And how do I load the module? You know, why do I need to use using module? We have been using import module forever. Why is that not working? Yeah, sorry, I'm not part of the PowerShell team. I didn't implement it like that way. And so basically, how can I do something? And yeah, that's where I realized, and I was almost so close to actually stop using classes because, okay, this is going to be hell for me in the future to simply manage those feedback. So basically, what I learned is that import module was important, simply because it simplifies everything. If you use just import module, you have access to your functions. People don't need to create instances of your classes, right? And they can just use it. It's ready to use. So people wanted to get help. They wanted to have access to documentation of your module, and they wanted to learn how it works. So people wanted to avoid to instantiate classes, specifically people that don't have a developer background. It was too many brackets, double points, and parentheses for people that maybe were not used to write that much code. And in the end, end users, or at least the end users of my modules, they were more comfortable as simply using functions. And voila. And so with this feedback and this experience, so I actually wanted to go more in depth, but I had to do some sacrifices on the amount of slides I had in here. So there's one video I actually deleted. But in the end, the one thing I would recommend, if today you write a PowerShell module that contains classes, is to follow this structure. So the big yellow part is a module, right? And imagine you write a class in which you write the base functionality. You use methods to create functionality, and you use properties and classes to hold your data. And then you're going to expose that functionality through functions simply by calling the methods. And basically that's it. That's the only trick you need to know. I've summarized it here. It looked very simple, but it was not that simple for me to get to this point. If you do like this structure, you can say goodbye to using module, and you can continue to use import module. And that was my objective, right? And so here we can see on the left side, I have a class. This is a class we actually use in production called package document. This is something we use so a package document is something you use to describe a legacy package in config manager. So a package is like a way of deploying an application. And this application is actually described in an XML document. And this class is here to do everything it has to do, the checks and everything on that document. And so basically I have a class package document, and before we would be using module, and then we would do, brackets, package document, new, blah, blah, blah. If we would communicate that to the user, okay, create an instance of my class, etc. Today, what I do and what I recommend is I simply write a wrapper, get package document here, for example, you give them some properties, like here path, and then you do the instantiation in that part. And by doing that, and using just the import module, the function is actually in the module scope. So he doesn't have any problem to access the class, because that was actually the big problem. If he was not using module, you would not have access as an end user to your classes. You could not instantiate it. And this is why we were using module. And so like this, you can avoid that step, make things easier for your end users, and actually abstract all that complexity, what classes are. And so we can see here, we have the instantiation on the right, and it simply calls that constructor there on the left. So again, here, the technical implementation here is not very relevant. It's more about the idea. And so really, if there's one thing that I would really like that you guys take back, is the structure of this module. Having a function that calls a class. This function, of course, needs to be public, so it needs to be in the functions, forgot the name, in the function thing, in the module, functions to export, thank you. And so just another example, same thing. So I have written a class, just one class, and then I simply go and call that functionality from different functions. I have here another function, test package document. I want to be sure that the naming conventions and all of that stuff is respected, that there's no like weird things that doesn't break. So I have in my class, I have a method called validate document, and the only thing I'm doing is I'm calling that method from my function. And so, what are the benefits of this approach? It's really, one, you can use the import module, so you have access again to comment-based help. So we didn't see it here, it's a bit hidden. I closed it so it was not too big because it was pretty a big help part. But we have access to comment-based help, so we can actually document again our functionality. Two, we have a big level of abstraction, so we hide the complexity of of our code to the end users actually using it. We actually have a good segregation, so we can separate. You see, I have in the same class, I had different functionality that would still link to the package document, but I could still segregate them just at different methods. And this is actually, it makes testing also very, very easy, because we can only test classes, unit test classes, and that might be enough. And then you can do this extra mile where you can go and test your functions. And also, if you stay until the end of this talk, I will show you actually, I've written automation to help you write your tests based on classes, simply because you can trust them, and that is fantastic. And then, again, like I said before, it enables us to use import module, right? And that was really my objective. I really tried to come back to this. And so for you guys, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this approach, but for me, it took a long time to get there, right? And, yeah, I just wanted to share that very importantly with you. So now that we know like the kind of like the structure that I would recommend and that I have, learned over the time, let's look at what is existing in the field. So learning from the masters. So unfortunately, there's not so many PowerShell modules in the wild that use PowerShell classes, or at least not that I'm aware of. And so maybe I don't follow everybody on Twitter here. And so if you have written a module that uses classes, for example, I would love you guys hit me up there at the coffee and we discuss about it. You share a link or whatever. I'm just curious of how you guys would do it. So I've received feedback. I asked on Twitter, and then Doug Finke was like, okay, I have written a module that uses classes. And so Doug Finke has written a module called ImportExcel, which is absolutely fantastic to generate everything that has to do with Excel. And he sent me this picture with an example to his class that he integrated in his module. And so he has only one class for one specific thing, to generate graphs, charts in Excel, and that's it. And so if you have a look, he also did it like this. He's not instantiating the class like I was showing with new and everything. He has abstracted that for the end users using the new plot function. So Polaris from Tyler Leonard and Micah Reardon. So in this one, there's one class in one separate file. That's it. Polaris has 5 big classes. We can see them at the lower right corner. MIME type, Polaris, Polaris middleware, etc., etc. The implementation here is not very important. I wanted to highlight how modules are structured actually in the wild. So we have middleware, request, etc., etc. So 5 classes. Sorry. So PSHTML, this is actually my module. And it's actually pretty funny because I have done this same talk at the French PowerShell user group in Paris a year ago. And at the time, I hadn't written any classes for this module. So this slide was not in it. And also it's pretty funny, I think, that I have redone the slides actually with the experience I have since that year. And the slides, I changed almost everything because I actually think my level has been rising since, but okay. So we can see here on the right part, I have two places where I have code. One in a single PSM1 file. So that's actually what you guys also have. If you go in the gallery to install module PSHTML, you're going to have that only that part, just one PSM1 file with all the classes in it. And then when I develop something, you can see we have that blue square. I have code, and in code I have classes. And here we can see I have only 4 files. But in total, I have 37 classes, and I'm not counting the enums with it. And simply, I decided not to organize them one file, one class, which we're going to see in a second in another module, but I organized them by theme. So, for example, if you have a look, I have here logging or charts. Charts is a very big part of PSHTML, and that's 100% classes. And simply for the development, having, at the beginning, I had everything, one class in one file, but that's really a pain when you develop, because the ISE or VS Code is going to have some red squiggly things, because it's going to, specifically if you have inheritance, because it's going to say, oh, okay, I cannot find that other thing, and it was like too much red. And yeah, this is why I organized them by theme. So some here visibility, we have like the configuration here, logging, charts, and include. So again, technical implementation here is not very important. I want you to see the how it's structured. And then we have PoshBot. PoshBot is amazing. Technically, it's really amazing. So if you want to learn something about classes in code, read the code from PoshBot. That's really impressive. And so when I started, I was like, I opened that one, I asked on the internet, and Brandon Olin was like, okay, you should read PoshBot. It has only classes, and I was like, 43 classes. Whoa, that's amazing. Specifically, that last year, I didn't have any classes in PSHTML, so I had 37 classes here, but the gap between Polaris that had 5 classes and PoshBot, 43 classes, was actually huge for me. But now, with the experience of PSHTML, I was like, okay, 43 classes. And we can see here, he has folder classes, and every class is in a separate file, right? And there are like really a lot of classes: approver, command parser, command history, config provider parameter, access filter, base logger, and command.ps1. The thing is that he doesn't have all the classes in one specific file only. He had some classes, some files that had several classes in it, and that actually threw me off a little bit later, which I'm going to show to you. So the learning the observations actually of analyzing everything that has been on the field. So indeed, there's not that much, but I think actually PoshBot is very, very well structured. So one, have separate files for functions, classes. Separate private and public functions in folder. We can see it on the right. We have underneath classes we have functions, and in there we have private and functions. So this, I would recommend you guys to go and have a look at the talk from Chris Gardner. He has a talk about, so I forgot the name of the talk, but he's really explaining how to structure your module. And he does it also talking about classes. And so he's also recommending separating private and function classes, at least in development. Then one file per class or one file per theme, because that actually helped me to have less red in my code. And really, please try not to use dot sourcing in your PSM1 file. That's, in my opinion, a bad practice, and that slows your script so much down. So, for example, Polaris does that, and that's bad. Really don't do it. Simply for several reasons. One, it slows everything down. And so, for example, PSHTML, I have around 91 functions in it. And when I was importing the module with PSM1 file that was dot sourcing everything, for one import, I think I needed 12 seconds or so. So 12 seconds in life is okay. But that doesn't scale well, and that's the problem. It's scaling. You want to test your code, right? And so each time I did a modification, I had my pester tests running to check the complete module of PSHTML. The thing is like I have around, I think, 600 pester tests. So that's a lot. And each of those things is like loads the module first and then execute the test. Load the module first, execute the test. So if you have to do that 600 times, like the execution time was super huge. And that was simply too much. I think for all my tests to pass, I think I needed 24 minutes. And that was like way too long. So I did a change, okay, push, waiting for the test, and then at 19 minutes it will fail. It's like, ah, no. And okay, I go back, do a change, and then after 11 minutes, I have another failing. You know, so that was way too long. And so by simply centralizing everything in one PSM1 file, structuring it with enums at the top, classes in the middle, functions at the private functions, public functions, that really changed everything. I went from 14 seconds to, I think, almost less than a second, and then my test speed was exponentially also better. So, using existing tools. So, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and by saying that, I want to start a small talk about UML. So, like I said, I don't have a developer background, so I have no idea. I didn't know that things like UML or some other things I'm going to talk about actually existed, right? And I've actually learned about this really by video recordings or by reading stuff, right? And so before I showed you all those modules, right? PSHTML, PoshBot, Polaris with the code, and I told you don't look at the technical implementation because that's actually also the easy part. And it was confusing because there's so much lines of code. And when I was going through PoshBot, so PoshBot has 9,000 lines of code in the PSM1 file. And if you're new to that project, you want to contribute to that project, and you want to understand how that is written without any diagram or so, you need to go and read the code, which is amazingly too much. And yeah, it's horrible. Don't do that, right? And so there's this thing called UML, it stands for Unified Modular Language, which is a way of, that has been there since ever for developers, but how they can communicate the structure of their classes. And so we can see here a very basic example. We have animal at the top, cow and lion, and it makes sense. Cow inherits from animal, etc. So we can see here, this line here separates properties from methods, and the plus means that they are public, that are visible from outside, and the minus means that they are private, that they are only available inside that class. So in PowerShell we don't have that notion of public and private, and we can only put methods to like a pseudo state called hidden. And so I was like, okay, this is great, UML. That would actually really help to have a quick understanding of, you know, what can we do, what can we achieve with a module. How can I actually, okay, I want to add this feature, how can I do it? Where should I look into the code? And I was like, okay, can we generate UML diagrams for existing PowerShell project with classes? And the answer is no, cannot. But that's not true. Actually, now it is, and I'm going to show you right now. I've written a module called PS class utils, which actually has a lot of small utilities that actually helps you as a developer, PowerShell developer, developing classes to make your life easier. And here we go. So this is a demo. I record my demo, so I don't have issues. So it's available on the gallery. It's called PS class utils. Import the module, and then there's a function called write CU class diagram, and here I'm calling it. Not yet. I'm just showing you guys. This is the Polaris folder. Several classes in different files. I am calling the write CU class diagram on that with the -show, and so it generates a file on the other screen, and here, voila, here we have a class diagram. So Polaris doesn't have, right? So I start with Polaris because Polaris is pretty simple and there's no inheritance or stuff like that. And we're going to continue. And so we had all 5 classes here. It's also possible to exclude some classes because sometimes you have way too much information. With dash exclude here, we can see we only have 3 classes, and that's it. So I just want to come back here. So very quickly, I'm not sure if you guys can see it properly, but we can see here at the top we have properties. So this is how it's structured, huh? Up until here, here we have properties, then underneath we have this line constructors, which separates the properties from the constructors. Then here we can see we have one constructor asking for a system.net.http listener response. And then underneath here we have methods. So this is basically the structure we're going to have in the following diagrams. So, oh, yeah, sorry, this is a video. Yeah, so excluding, yeah, it's a bit difficult with the videos and PowerPoint, because if you click, it goes to the next slide actually. And so Polaris, now let's have a look at PSHTML. Remember I said there are 37 classes in that one. And so, like I said, there's code in 2 parts. When I develop, it's in code / classes, and when I ship it on the internet, it is everything in one PSM1 file. So here I first go and I make the diagram of the existing PSM1 file, write CU class diagram dash show. Actually one on my screen on the side, and here we have it, right? And so this might look confusing, it might look like too big, but I guarantee that if you need to find something, looking into this diagram will be way easier than trying to read through the code. And yeah, you can zoom, you can extend. So by the way, this has been built using another community project called PSGraph from Kevin Marquette. And so if you need to graph something, use that module. It's really fantastic. And yeah, we can go and we can zoom and you can see we have inheritance here and voila. So I know this is actually UML-ish. It's not real UML, simply because when I wrote this module, I actually knew how UML worked. So this is another version coming up, and we're going to fix that there. But I think it's a good representation for PowerShell developers which are not used to it. And so it's also possible here using, I use here a parameter called show composition, where you can actually see the composition of the objects. And also, instead of pointing to that one PSM1 file, I'm pointing to the code / classes folder. And so we can see here, I have little squares, and inside the diagram. Each square here is actually the file in which all the classes are structured. So that helps you also to see maybe some hidden classes like I had with PoshBot. And here we can see inheritance of a log document, etc. And PoshBot, so okay, be ready, maybe put your 3D glasses on or so, because here we have PoshBot, and that's like it looks like spaghetti, but I guarantee it doesn't taste like spaghetti. This is very structured, and this is pretty amazing. And imagine if you need to add functionality to this module without having this overview. It's impossible, actually, in my opinion. So I have to speed up a little bit. Some extra functionality in this module is that by writing it, I first started with write CU class diagram. That was my objective because I wanted to understand PoshBot. But then actually, when I refactored, I actually wrote things in a way that, because I'm parsing the AST, and the AST doesn't have like a straightforward way to get classes, constructor, and methods, I've written abstractions for those things. So now in PS class utils, you also have the possibility to go and to get CU class, like I did here, and simply we can see on the, so this is on the logging part, we can see we have a class called log document, log file, etc. And so if you want to have only the constructors of the log file class name, for example, that's also possible. We can see normally it should return 2 constructors, and we can see them here. We have log file, a parameterless constructor, and one with, it asks simply for a path. And then we have this amazing pull request I received from, I think, the smartest guy on this planet, IIS Reset Me, Matthias. He actually is like, here, you can use this. Write CU interface implementation. And so this is a new functionality in the module where you can go and point to an interface, and it will actually implement your interface. See? It wrote the code for you. You don't need to do anything more, right? But just overwrite the methods here, and that's it. And then the last but not least thing I want to show you is that, okay, if you write classes, what is cool about classes is that you can trust them, compared to functions. And so by trusting them, you're sure that what you have is what you're going to get. And so it's possible to write super cool automation. And I wanted to write a pester test for my classes. And so this write CU pester test that goes and it writes your pester test for you. So you don't have to do anything anymore. And so here we see, I generate the class, the pester test. I'm going to show you the class on the next slide because I forgot to show it in the video. And we can see here, we have the pester test. And when I invoke it, boom, all tests passed. And I have, look at it, 100% coverage, right? And so this is a very small class, but what I can guarantee is that write CU pester test will always generate code coverage of 100%. All tests might not pass, but at least everything will be covered. Constructors and methods. And, okay, so he's coming back to the beginning. And so here, just wanted to show you, so this is I forgot to show the class actually in the video. I had like this class cat, I want to keep it small, that generated these pester tests here on the right? And from this, I got that simply by using write CU pester test. And that's it. And I think that that's pretty cool, actually. And so we have seen that, okay, before we had all this bunch of text, and if we wanted to simply talk about code, we always needed to talk about really lines of code. And it was actually horrible for me. And so writing that tool actually really helped me to improve the way of communicating, I think. And it's possible to have a quick overview on anything by generating a diagram. And so I actually de facto now add diagrams in all of my projects. I push that with my code, and it's always there. So the key takeaways for me is, one, the file structure is key. Write core functionality in a class. Expose end user functionality through functions, and use a single PSM1 file. Use write CU class diagram for UML-ish representation of your code, and generate your pester test using write CU pester test, simply because you will need to tweak a little bit afterwards, but if you do that, you have at least 100% cover, at least, you can have 110, but you're gonna have 100% coverage. So, learning from the master. I need to be quicker, I'm pretty short on time here. So, I've been on the internet and I was just searching for keywords with programming, etc. And I came around this word, this acronym called SOLID. And for me, that was actually really an eye-opener, because it's not that complicated, but like I said, I don't have this developer background, so I was missing, I had some gaps in my ground knowledge, which I actually covered by reading books and looking at videos. And SOLID is one of these things that actually, if you keep that in mind when writing your code, is going to make your code really better, and we're going to see that in a second. So SOLID is a principle, so maybe not invented by this person, which is Robert C. Martin, aka called Uncle Bob. So this guy is a legend. He's written so many books, and he is on many videos on the internet, and he's actually very funny. So I recommend you watch his videos. And so he's actually really strongly promoting these principles. And so it's actually an acronym, and every letter means something, which I want to cover with you here once. So for the people that don't know it, guys, know that it exists. I don't expect that you guys are going to know it by heart right now. But in the end, you need to know that it exists. And so one day, if you have some time in the train, whatever, just pick one of those letters and do a YouTube search and just watch videos. Just like small videos of 3-5 minutes of people explaining what the O of the solid principle synths are, for example, and with code examples, etc. So S stands for single responsibility principle. Is, for example, right, one class, one method must have only one responsibility, right? For example, you have a method called create user. Well, don't add that user in that same method to a group, right? Write another method called add user to group or something like that. O, open close principle, means your code must be open for extension, but closed for modification. Sounds actually straightforward, but you need to write your code in a way that actually you're going to be able to add new sections of code in it without deleting some stuff, because simply variable names or structure doesn't make any sense. And it sounds easy, but it's actually not that easy to follow as a rule. List-of substitution principle. Okay, so that one is maybe not applicable to function. Maybe it's actually not applicable to function, but it actually means that if you have the ability to replace any instance of a parent class with an instance of one of the child classes without side effects. So what does it mean? It means, like, for example, we have this small diagram here. We have animal and we have cat and dog that inherit from animal. And let's say you want to add a lion class to this. And so here we have this boat thing, which is the Noah's Ark. And we have this array. And so if we add this lion thing, it should not break the code, because simply we have exchanged like a cat for a lion, or a dog for a cat. So we should be able to add any type of animal without breaking anything. So in the end, it means that they all should have like the same methods down here with the same names, and they should return the same types. I, interface segregation principle. So this is also something more for real classes languages. So write a small interface instead of one huge class. So we don't have interfaces in PowerShell, which is actually not a problem. We can implement interfaces, C# interfaces, but we cannot write our own interfaces, which is actually not a big of a deal, because we can simply write one parent class and pretend that that is an interface and simply inherit from it. And then, yeah, a class should not be forced to depend on methods it doesn't use, actually. So, for example, like my class boat should not inherit from animal, because boat.talk doesn't make any sense, except maybe in an anime or so. But and then dependency inversion principle, which is also kind of logic. But so high-level modules should not depend on low-level implementation. So what does it actually mean? So concretely is a script should have a dependency on the Active Directory module, for example. But the Active Directory module should not have a dependency on your script. Right? So low-level implementation should depend on high-level modules. And so I was learning those principles, and I was like, yay, I know everything now. This is fantastic. I have all the knowledge I need. And then it's like, are you sure? Right? Actually not. There's like still a lot to learn, and I only have 2 minutes left. So using knowledge from the math. Do I have 2 minutes, or do I have 15 minutes?
I think you have 15 minutes.
15? Okay, that's good. Okay. So I'm going to make the Q&A maybe smaller so I can show you all I wanted to show. So using knowledge from the masters, so design patterns. So that was also something I saw on those videos, and I was like, what the heck is a design pattern? I have no idea. And so a design pattern is a general reusable solution to a commonly occurring problem. So Design Pattern is actually a book that has been written in the 70s by those 4 very smart persons. And basically, it is just methodology to common problems. They offer solutions to common problems of object-oriented programming. And so basically what it contains is you have several design patterns, and each of them going to have a definition. They're going to expose a problem. They're going to show how you can resolve it using a specific way of designing your code using a UML diagram. And then they're going to have a technical implementation of and an example of that design pattern. And so when you have a look at the design patterns, I heard like so many keywords, and I heard like, okay, facade pattern and factory pattern, observer pattern and decorator pattern. And yeah, and I actually started to study them. I went and I looked so many different videos. You have tons of documentation on individual design patterns. And that's actually what I started to do. And by doing that, that really increased my knowledge. And ever since I did that, I have now 37 classes in PSHTML, right? And I couldn't have done it before without the knowledge here. And so this slide is maybe like out of space, right? But it's not me trying to catch the ball from Michael Jordan, right? It's me trying to point you guys to that number, right? 23. So if you need to remember something, it's 23. Think of Michael Jordan. In that original design pattern books, there are 23 design patterns that exist, right? And so basically my personal challenge was to, sometime in my life, I want to know them by heart. I want to be able to implement them anytime. And so again, people that have studied development normally would study them at school, right? But I think for most of us here, we have learned development like in the streets, right? And so this is something that we don't get in the streets. And so now I want to show you like a real design pattern applied to the PowerShell language called the factory pattern, and which I have implemented in PSHTML. And I want to show you what it actually brings to your code if you implement the design pattern. So don't forget, there are 23 design patterns. I'm just taking one and applying it to some code here. So this is the what it says in the book, on Wikipedia, what the factory pattern is. It is a creational pattern that uses methods to deal with problem of creating object without having to specify the exact class of the object that will be created. And this is the raw diagram, the generic diagram, UML diagram of it. But we're not going to look at the technical of the details here. We're going to see how it's structured in a PowerShell implementation. So design patterns in PSHTML. So in PSHTML, I have a functionality called assets. And so that actually offers developers the possibility to link so JavaScript code or styling, so CSS files or external frameworks into PSHTML code. And that is something I called an asset. And so I wanted to also to support the fact that, okay, sometimes you want to link your framework on a local file, but sometimes you want to use a CDN. And so that's something I didn't have in PSHTML, and I simply wanted to give the possibility to a user to create a .cdn file, and in that file you would have a JSON structure with some CDN information. And I wanted to support that. And so using a factory, that makes everything much, much easier. And so that yellow should have come at the end, but here we can see, don't take a look at the yellow here, but here we have the blue part. That's the asset factory, right? That is, it's one class, and so it's of type asset factory, it's blue. Then we have yellow. We have an asset, which is a parent class, and then we have two child classes here, which one is for script assets, so that's for JavaScript files, and one is for style asset for CSS files. And we can see the yellow, everything that is yellow means it's of the same type. And we can see the blue part here, what I underlined in yellow, is actually what returns something of type asset, right? And so in the end, so this is a static method. So basically you don't need to do new something. And so by calling it like this, you know, the code is going to abstract. I'm just going to point him to a path, and he's going to do the heavy lifting of, okay, what am I going to, what type of asset is this? Is it .css? Is it .gs? Is it .cdn? And the factory is going to return me an object, so create an object for me and do that heavy lifting for me. And so in the end, this is not the real implementation in PSHTML, but we can have get PSHTML asset and then simply put it in the function as we know how it is before. And so here we have the prior modification of the CDN. I have my assets factory class here. We can see we have the two parts here, which in a switch would return the script asset or style asset. And then how would we go with adding a new asset? Simply the same diagram, but we add a new class and we inherit from the parent asset class. And that's it. I add a new class and I add like one statement in my switch to handle .cdn, and that's it. And by doing just that, I still reuse the same code to generate new type of assets, but I have written maybe 20 lines of code, right? And so here we have the final implementation of it, and we can see here I have PSHTML asset name, and here we can see by name we have, like, for example, chart.js. And when I generate chart.js here, it's going to generate this HTML page, which is maybe a bit sad, but here in head we can see script, and then it just points to an src, and so to that .js file. So this is what I call in PSHTML an asset. And so now I'm just copying a folder there called Metro UI with two .cdns, and so this is nothing big, and in there I have like a small JSON structure with source, which points to like an HTTP link. And so I re-import the module here, -force, so that the module can see that I have new things in there. So this is a dynamic parameter, and you can then tab through the things, name, and then here at the very bottom we have Metro US, Metro UI, and Metro UI GS. And we can also do -type and only point now to CDN, and that's it. And so I've done -cdn, and it will actually go and print out all the CDNs there. But just the CDN, chart.js, bootstrap, and all of that is not in here. And we can see I had some integrity information as well. And everything is there. So that's the application. So I know this can be a bit challenging, specifically if you're not used to this, but I would recommend that you guys watch the recording of this and maybe go through this example. The code will be online as well. And if you have any questions, please hit me up. And so my key takeaways of design patterns is that the factory pattern is a standard answer to a common well-known problem. It offers you a reusable design. So I have today a factory in here, but actually, which I didn't tell you, is I think I have 3 different factories in PSHTML, which actually offers really me the extensibility of, okay, I want to add the creation of a new type of thing. I simply add a new class. The factory can handle that de facto. And it offers then reusable code. So PSHTML application of the asset factory. So I delegated the creation of asset file in one single class. So we have the separation of concerns. Code is easily extensible. So it's open for the principle. It's open for extension, but closed for modification, right? I just added one switch and added a separate class. I didn't went and fooled around with existing code. And then the design is well known. And that's probably the most important part. Because before, for people that wrote only functions, before we were talking about code, and it's like, okay, we need to do this, and maybe, we started to write some stuff some really code on the whiteboard, and then people were like, huh, what are you talking about? And then now, with the knowledge of design patterns and the ability for you to create diagrams specifically, you talk about factory pattern. If you have studied them, the person is going to be, oh, you mean the factory pattern, the ones from the design pattern book? I absolutely know what you're talking about. This diagram, And so you can start to talk about design and architectural parts of your code without going in depth of like the little details of, we should add for each blah, blah, blah. And so my next steps now. So these are the design patterns that exist. I'm just going to list them here. Don't look at the details of them. But so there are like 3 parts in the design patterns: the creational design pattern, the structural design pattern, and the behavioral design pattern. So at least in the Gang of 4 book. And so the darker ones. So when I did this first talk in Paris a year ago, the only thing here that was dark was the strategy pattern and maybe the state pattern. And so the dark ones, I actually forgot to mention, is the ones that I have personally at least studied and or implemented, right? And so there are not that many, and some of them are really challenging, like for example the visibility pattern, that's one of. But this gave me actually a new challenge, you know, like new objectives. And sometimes when I'm in the bus or in the train, I just go and watch a video and try to understand it and try where I could apply them. What I would recommend to everybody here is to go through those design patterns. At least read the definition of them so that you know that they exist. And that when you read them, when you imagine, okay, I need to create a class, but actually the type of that class is going to change each time this or this happens. So you cannot know it in advance. In that case, there's a creational pattern that's called the factory pattern, or maybe the builder pattern. Who knows, you know? Okay. So in the end, what do we see here? And actually, I'm going to answer this question myself. This is a beautiful city. It's my native city called Strasbourg in beautiful Alsace. And here we have the cathedral. But what I want to show you guys here is this thing here. It's called a bridge, right? And so basically, with this knowledge, with UML diagrams, TDD, so the Pester test, the UML diagrams, I said the design pattern, solid principles, and the whole OOP constructs of development. If you know that, you have a bridge to other languages, like code like JavaScript or Java or C# based on classes will not look complicated anymore. And you're going to be able to go and actually participate on maybe the GitHub project, on GitHub things from the PowerShell repo, etc. And so we are at the end. So this is the summary. Please keep in mind the file structure of your class-based modules. Write classes. I would please write classes if you can. If you don't, challenge yourself. Just write classes. Add functionality through methods and expose them through public functions, right? And use actually your class kind of like an API that you would query from functions. And in the end, you're going to have like, we talked about it this morning at breakfast, we're going to have like a kind of like the functions will be your front end and the classes will be your back end, more or less. Think about solid, just the principles. Look at, if you have time, just look at one of the letters. Think about design patterns. And basically that's it. 2 books I would recommend. And if you're really new and you want to start and you want to have a very funny book also to read, use the one Head First Design Pattern. It's really funny and it's very good at explaining the stuff. And so when you read something here about one design pattern, believe me, when you finish the chapter, you know it. And the design patterns, elements of reusable object-oriented software is like the older one, and that's more for reference. Okay, here we have some links, and voila. Are there any questions? Yeah. Actually, I have not done any measurements, so I cannot tell. Maybe Stéphane knows that better than me. If using classes is faster or slower than using functions. Voilà. Parameter binding on functions are faster because you bypass the parameter binding. That was it, right? Yeah. It's cheaper to call a method on a class than to call a function. Oh, okay. So I didn't understand that. So yeah, so it's faster. Use classes, it's faster. That's all you need to know. Voilà. Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, there's another. 2 other ones. Great. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever. No, so actually this is what I was mentioning before. We don't have that flexibility, unfortunately, but it's because how they have built the language. And if you really want to know exactly the details, you need to ask the little Einstein next to you there, because he knows everything about that. But no, the only option that we have to create private properties or methods is with the keyword called hidden. And so it just hides it. And so basically this is something I covered actually in my part 1, which actually I didn't deliver this year, right? And okay, this is maybe weak, but it's the only option we have. You had a question as well? Okay. Would there be an interest in seeing part 1 of this talk, like really the basics? So what is a property? What is a method? What is a constructor? Inheritance? Actually, it's the basics of OOP. Okay, I see a few hands. Yeah. Okay. More? Okay. Yeah, everybody raised their hand. It's okay, that's maybe 20%, 30% of the room. Okay. Huh? Yeah, I can. I was thinking of doing a breakout session, but I didn't want to put too much pressure on myself, right? But yeah, and I actually think it makes sense, and I know it's difficult for a lot of people for that learning curve, but voila. And so I'm 1 minute overhead. Maybe this last question.
In one of the first slides, you had TDD.
Yeah.
Can you say anything quickly about that?
So test-driven. So TDD stands for test-driven development. It's a methodology actually that you need to use when you write your code. You write your tests first and then your code. And the thing is, so in my first talk, I said, okay, what I'm going to do next. And one of the slides was, I want to do more TDD. And since I've wrote write CU pester test, right? So actually, I'm not doing any TDD because I'm generating automatically my test at the end. It's a bad practice, but in the end, even though I forced myself to do TDD, naturally, I never came up with the structure of doing it. Okay, so if you have other questions, please catch me at the coffee break. And well, thank you for your time.